Okay, we're up.
I think you said that we're up. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear.
Correct.
Okay. Um, Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm here with Jerry Redfern. Hi, Jerry.
Hey Laura, how you doing?
I'm good. So, in the interest of disclosure here, Jerry and I work together at Capital in Maine, which is a media outlet based in Los Angeles. And today we're going to be talking about some of his reporting on hydrogen. But as part of a project called The Slick at Capital in Maine, he's been reporting for the past year, 2 years, I can't quite remember, on the fossil fuel industry in New Mexico. So, thanks again, Jerry.
Oh yeah, this is my great pleasure.
So the governor recently was pushing, and legislators introduced the Hydrogen Hub Development Act. And we're going to get into some of the specifics in a minute, but first I wanted to talk about why all this talk about hydrogen in New Mexico lately. It's on the governor's agenda. The federal delegation is interested. Where is this all coming from?
Well, I think there are a couple of different issues at play that all come together particularly well in New Mexico. The first thing is that hydrogen is actually kind of a really neat fuel, in that if you use it as a fuel, there are a couple of ways you can use it. If you use it through what's called a power cell, it produces a whole bunch of energy, and the only things that come out the other side of it are water and heat. So it's an extremely green fuel if you're able to use it that way. Another way to use it is just to straight burn it. Like think of the Hindenburg blimp going up back in the 30s. I mean, it's extremely flammable, so you can use it as a fuel that way. It's not quite as clean, but it's still a fairly clean fuel if you burn it like through a power plant or something like that. The thing that brings it to New Mexico in particular is that hydrogen is most often made, far and away most often made from natural gas, in a process where you really compress the natural gas and you heat it up, and the hydrogen atoms start popping off, and you collect those and you get your hydrogen gas. And part of the big problem, though, is what do you do with the leftovers of that, and how much natural gas it takes to make that hydrogen.
So it sounds to me like when you burn it as a fuel, it's clean, but the production of making the hydrogen is maybe not so clean. Am I getting that right?
Oh yeah, for sure. Actually, when you burn it, you do still get some pollutants off the far end. There are various things that would show up as actually that would need to be regulated. If you were to say, for example, in New Mexico, have a power plant that burns hydrogen, you'd have to get permits to be able to do that. But yeah, the main concern is the pipeline that gets natural gas into a thing like a power plant or to a distribution center, because of problems New Mexico has historically and continues to have with leaks and such from natural gas production from the well to the production facility.
And so I've heard and read in your stories there's two basically kinds of hydrogen, green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. What's the difference between those two?
Well, actually, to be fully accurate, and it's getting a little bit wonky, there's a full like rainbow of hydrogen flavors. But and actually there are three that are the most talked about. And green hydrogen, we'll take it from there, is the absolute cleanest hydrogen that we now know how to make. And it's essentially you take water, plain water, and you zap it with a whole bunch of electricity. And if that electricity comes from a renewable resource itself, that's where we get the idea of green hydrogen. You have the very, very clean hydrogen fuel made from a very, you know, non-greenhouse gassy process. Blue hydrogen, which is what we're mostly talking about in New Mexico, comes where you take a fuel stock like natural gas, which has lots of climate implications involved in it. You break the hydrogen off of it, but you're left with an awful lot of CO2 after the fact, and you have to do something with that. And if you're able to get rid of upstream emissions, like I was talking about a little bit ago, and you're able to sequester that CO2 somehow, generally underground, then it gets that designation of blue hydrogen, which is, you know, kind of green. Blue's kind of green, right? But the majority of hydrogen, as I was also talking about earlier, the vast overwhelming majority that we have in use in the country today is what's known as gray hydrogen, where you take the natural gas, you crack the hydrogen atoms off of it, and essentially just vent the carbon dioxide and other pollutants into the sky after the fact. And it's a pretty dirty process.
Hence gray, I see now. I was
Yes.
expecting a different color on the rainbow than gray, but it makes sense now. And so, hydrogen hub, where is this idea coming from? It just seemed like all of a sudden there was all this talk around hydrogen hubs. Like, why?
That's a pretty good question because I think again there are a couple of different angles that are coming together in dealing with this. I think, well, to be blunt, the main reason is that in Joe Biden's the first of his Build Back plans, he offered up $8 billion with a B dollars to build up to 4 of these hydrogen hubs around the United States. And, our legislators in Washington and then folks back at the Roundhouse and in Santa Fe saw that and said, oh, hey, we could do that. We should step up and do that sort of thing. The other side of it is that hydrogen as a fuel on a global scale is really seen in many quarters as a replacement fuel for, say, regular gasoline or diesel fuel in heavy machinery and manufacturing processes, where you can turn these very, very dirty manufacturing or transportation processes into much more green things. And that's seen as being very important, globally. So people do want to get this hydrogen going. The big question is how and where. And then the other thing that goes along with that is that, at least in the United States for sure at this point, it takes a fair bit of subsidies to make it profitable for businesses to do this. So all of these things sort of work together to point to New Mexico.
As you were talking about this, and I don't mean to go off on too much of a tangent, but as you were talking about that, kind of this move to clean up some of these big, sort of manufacturing sectors or transportation sectors with a new, cleaner energy, it really reminds me of the conversation that happens sometimes around nuclear energy. People think of that as like a less greenhouse gas intensive electricity source than, say, coal or natural gas, but there's all these like front end production side problems. Here in New Mexico, we can look at the legacy of uranium mining and certainly what to do with the spent fuel. I wonder if you've heard conversations around winners and losers when it comes to hydrogen, like maybe there are some winners who get to use that cleaner fuel, but losers on the production end in terms of, increased natural gas production or emissions, or have you heard conversations like that at all?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. These sorts of externalities that are involved, in particular with natural gas production, have all sorts of people up in the San Juan Basin in particular very nervous and unhappy about the prospect of this showing up in their backyard. The San Juan Basin has been economically depressed for several years, and I think that a lot of, shall we say, economic leaders in that neck of the woods, which tends toward natural gas producers and people affiliated with those things, they're very excited about this possibility of restarting the whole natural gas industry up there and getting it chugging once again. But the problem is, if you drive around up there, you see pretty quickly that you have lots of people living amid an awful lot of natural gas wells, and those natural gas wells have a long history and documented history of leaking. And that creates, global climate issues, but it also creates health issues for the people who live right there on the ground. And those people who live right there on the ground, those frontline communities, are not even a little bit, many of them are not even a little bit excited about having that start up again in force.
Yeah. So the governor's Hydrogen Hub Development Act, can you explain what that bill was and what we saw happen with that last week?
Well, we should say was with an asterisk because, and I'll take that sort of backwardsly. It was up for debate in the House session, which is where these things normally start. And after nearly 4 hours of back and forth talk about it, which was kind of interesting, I'll get back to that in a second, the legislators didn't actually kill it outright, they tabled it, which does allow the possibility that it could be rewritten, it could be rejiggered, it could be brought back up for debate down the line. But since we have this very compressed session that's supposed to be devoted to monetary issues, that looks probably unlikely. So put that to the side for now. So it's probably dead, but we don't know if it'll come back like some sort of hydrogen zombie. That remains to be seen. The main parts of the bill were actually a series of tax credits mainly, and tax regulations to put into place to create incentives for businesses to show up in New Mexico to make hydrogen. I mean, that's kind of what it gets down to. And then also a series of rather particular tax credits and breaks for people who would use hydrogen in power plants to create electricity. And those look to be rather particularly pointed to two projects, one outside of Grants and another one up in the Four Corners region that are hoping to revive a pair of mothballed coal-powered power plants. And the hope is to essentially rejigger the burning part of the power plant and squirt hydrogen in there and ignite it and boil water and make electricity in the way that we know about making electricity in the past. So those are sort of the thumbnail outlines of what was included in the bill. Yeah, kind of like that.
And so this committee hearing in the House last week, how did that vote break down?
I think that, this is pure speculation on my part, but just watching the faces of the people voting on it, I think everybody was a little surprised by how it turned out. Because strangely, Republicans were voting against it, and you would think that normally, especially a number of the people on that committee are very, very pro oil and gas, and creating a hydrogen hub would have really opened up natural gas development, would have really promoted opening up natural gas development, but they voted against it because they said it wasn't properly funded and gave too much away in tax breaks, which, might seem like an odd thing considering that, we have, as a country, have given all sorts of tax breaks to oil and gas development for decades now. Be that as it may, that's the way that they voted. Most of the Democrats on the committee voted in favor of it, going along with the governor's hopes, although there were some comments for hopeful changes down the line to streamline some things and maybe knock some of the tax breaks out of there. But I also think that there were Democrats on that committee who thought that there were real problems with the environmental background, like we were just talking about, of creating hydrogen in particular from natural gas. I'd like to interject just one thing there. I keep talking about natural gas in all of this, and should point out, to be completely clear and open, that Secretary Kenny at the NMED, at the Environment Department, who's also been promoting this on behalf of the governors, regularly pointed out that this would allow people to make hydrogen from, let's say, agricultural things, essentially collecting cow farts and things that come out of cow manure ponds or at garbage dumps and stuff like that, which also do release some methane, which could then be turned into hydrogen. But there's no way that those things would compare with the amount of hydrogen that you get out of making it from natural gas. So just to be clear, I want to be open and clear about that particular corner of things.
Yeah, so that, again, like the hydrogen issue just seems politically a little bit confusing, I guess, in New Mexico,
Yes.
where we have a Democratic governor who's been directing agencies to work on cutting greenhouse gas emissions. There's new reporting rules, all kinds of things like that. And yet, in her State of the State, she talked about this hydrogen hub. That same State of the State address was disrupted by protesters, registering their opposition to this hydrogen issue, and then we have Republicans also not supporting it. Can you explain any of this sort of political confusion to me?
Yeah, well, I can only say that I can try. I'm not sure there's a full great explanation for what exactly has gone on there. And an interesting thing is, I think you've noted in the past in your own reporting, is that one thing that Governor LaVon Grisham did not talk about was climate change in that whole thing, and that had to this point been one of her key issues since she came into office, and that was kind of a surprising omission. But I think the politics of this are a little bit funky, but they're explained in a paper that came out along with the Hydrogen Hub Act when it was released. It feels like a month ago, but I think it's only a little over a week ago. And that paper was actually written by a company started by a guy who's one of the best known oil and gas promoters up in the San Juan Basin, and who owns a business that drills natural gas wells up there. And I think that pretty much tells an awful lot of where this was coming from. I think that in many ways, the governor was trying to actually thread a couple of different needles. She's hoping to be able to get through that needle of hydrogen as a green fuel, as a very, greenhouse gas friendly fuel itself, and bring that up as a thing that we could do here, while also at the same time trying to thread that needle of throwing a bone to the oil and gas industry and saying, here's some possible development that could work for you. And then we could have this clean fuel that comes out of it after the fact. And then try to wrap those things together. And it doesn't seem to have worked to this point.
Yeah. So do you think, regardless of what happens, even if the bill doesn't come back this session, do you think we're going to continue to see these really, I feel like very robust conversations around hydrogen in New Mexico? Or is this something that's going to sort of peter away?
I think we're going to see more of it. It really depends upon how much of that federal money the state is still able to pull in to develop these particular plans. I think that a lot of the tax breaks that were in the governor's initial plan, where she was hoping to have them, I think, offset by those tax breaks coming in from the federal government. So I'm not sure how that will work in the future. But there are big plans already underway or already happening to deal with hydrogen in the state of New Mexico, with or without government help to get that done. So I think that's going to continue to happen. And if that continues to be done based on natural gas production, and it causes an uptick again in gas production, particularly in the Four Corners region in the San Juan Basin, I think we'll be hearing a fair bit about this into the future.
So just lastly, I wanted to touch on, we've talked about what hydrogen could mean for increasing natural gas production potentially in the state. You had a story recently at Capital in Maine about the new reporting measures. Can you talk a little bit about what we know and what we don't know about emissions from the fossil fuel industry in the state?
Yes, we know a lot and we don't know a lot all at the same time. It's a rather fascinating data set if you can pull it down and spend time to look through it. But the main thing is that back in last May, as part of the new methane rules that went into effect from the Oil Conservation Division, which is the government agency that essentially keeps track of the oil and gas coming out of the ground in the state and makes sure it all gets taxed and that we get our state's money worth of it. They implemented new rules that require oil and gas producers to account for and tally all of their leaking and venting and spills and everything that they're doing. Whereas in the past, it was a little hit or miss or a lot hit or miss. And yeah, it was a lot hit or miss. Let's just say that. And what it showed is that there were a lot of producers who obviously looked to have taken this seriously and noted that they were having an awful lot of vents and particularly flares from natural gas operations or from oil operations, and to levels that we simply had not seen documented before. We'd known, I think, that this had been going on. This had been documented sort of writ large and roughly by groups like the Environmental Defense Fund and others who got satellite information or did flights over the Permian Basin or the Four Corners and from airplanes measured emissions from oil and gas wells or processing places, or groups like Earthworks that would send people out on the ground with infrared cameras and look at oil and gas sites and note vents and flares and things that were leaking and send it to the state. But this is a much more robust system that relies on the producers themselves to note all of these things themselves in a very detailed manner and submit it regularly to the state. And under the penalty, which didn't happen before, if they don't report this stuff, they could be penalized for it and fined, upwards of millions of dollars. So there's a distinct stick there to try to keep them in line. But to get back to your point too, I mean, so there were a lot of operators that noted huge increases, year on year of venting, flaring, leaks, spills, et cetera. And there's no reason to think that they were doing anything different from before. They were just actually reporting it. And then other major producers in the state, very major producers in the state, noticed no differences whatsoever, or their numbers in their reporting actually went down, which is curious, to say the least.
Well, I'll be interested to see what happens, because if I have it right, these reporting future cuts will be based on this sort of current reporting. So we know how much is being emitted and how much we need to cut emissions into the future.
Right. So the state is also implementing, as part of the methane act that they're creating these rules under, these methane rules. Producers are required over the next several years to drop the amount that they're losing essentially to 2%. So only 2% of what comes out of a well can be lost, however you want to rack up that loss. Which actually, if you're talking about stuff like natural gas, that's actually a fairly potent amount of natural gas to be lost to the atmosphere, which is kind of a different question. But yeah, so this incident reporting that's going on now that I was just talking about is one way to keep track of who's losing what and how out of their wells. And that's going to become much clearer over the next couple of months with more reporting and different types of reporting that operators have to finish up.
Okay. Well, Jerry Redfern, thanks for talking with me about energy, and in particular, helping explain some of this stuff going on with hydrogen.
Oh, thank you, Laura. I love getting wonky about this.
Great. Thanks, Jerry.
See ya.
Bye.